What's going on, guys? Jeff here from Mad Hatter's Reef, and today we're going to be taking a look at the top 10 hard to keep corals. I hope everybody is having a fantastic day, and if you're new to what we're doing here, this is where I talk about everything reef tank related. So if you love reef tanks like I do, make sure you smash that subscribe button and don't forget to hit the bell. This week we're going to be taking a look at the top 10 hard to keep corals, so let's jump into it. All right, folks, so today we are going to be taking a look at the top 10 hard to keep corals. Now, some of these corals are extremely hard to keep, and others are corals that have been hard for me to keep. And I'm going to be sharing some of those with you today. And like most things within this hobby, the key to the success of keeping corals is understanding their requirements and what they need to survive. It's important not to get wrapped up in the moment and make that purchase for that coral that you've always wanted. You need to do your research and have a firm understanding of what that coral needs. In the long run, you'll be glad you did. Now, the idea behind this list is not to scare anybody away from keeping any type of coral. The idea behind this list is to help people understand the importance of educating yourself about the critters that you keep in your aquarium. Coming in at number 10 on our top 10 hard to keep corals is the Gorgonian. Now, these are also known as sea fans, and the one specifically that I'm going to state is hard to keep is the non-photosynthetic variety. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, the photosynthetic type of sea fans is extremely easy to keep, and they are a beautiful addition to any reef tank, and they actually make a reef tank look like a reef tank. They're a great addition. Now, if you find yourself hung up on those non-photosynthetic type of Gorgonians, it is possible to keep them. It's just a coral that is going to require a lot of feeding, and if you have a coral that requires a lot of feeding, there's potential for water quality to go downhill fast, and you're going to need a pretty rugged filtration system to be able to keep up with that additional feeding. Coming in at number 9 on our top 10 hard to keep corals is the Goniopora Coral. Although that this coral is relatively well known for being hard to keep and is in fact on my top 10 of hard to keep corals, it has gotten a lot easier, or at least the strands of this coral that we have in the hobby in circulation are a lot more hardy and well adapted to aquarium life. With that being said, this coral for a very long time was well known for being one of the hardest corals to keep. In the grand scheme of things, this coral's care level is moderate. It prefers that strong flow and strong lighting and wants to be in that middle to bottom section of the tank. And for a lot of people in their current systems, they don't really have that strong lighting that's hitting the bottom section of their tanks, and that's probably where this coral struggles the most. All in all, beautiful coral, but doesn't have the best history when it comes to being kept in an aquarium. Coming in at number 8 on our top 10 hard to keep corals is the Pagoda Cup Coral. Now, some of you are probably saying, Jeff, this is a easy to keep coral. And I beg to differ, because this is a coral that I have tried to keep pretty much in every single aquarium. I haven't done it in the water box yet, but this is a coral that I've tried to keep in every single one of my aquariums and have had no success with it. I've tried feeding it. I've tried spot feeding, broadcast feeding, and even going as far as taking a 2-liter, cutting the bottom out of it, and putting it over the coral, and then using the turkey baster to squirt the food into so the other tank inhabitants couldn't steal anything from it, and still couldn't get this coral to survive. This is a personal matter, but ultimately this is my top 10, and this coral is number 8. Coming in at number 7 on our top 10 hard to keep corals is the walking dendro. Now, this is an incredibly interesting coral. This coral actually seeks out a specific type of worm and attaches itself to that worm. And as the worm moves around, the coral moves around. So that's where it gets its name, the walking dendro. Now, even though that the walking dendro itself is probably one of the more hardier varieties of this species of coral, they are relatively finicky and don't always do the best in an aquarium setting. In the grand scheme of things, when it comes to the survivability of this coral, it is a coral that requires frequent feedings. So if you are going to purchase this coral, which they aren't really that cheap and they're pretty small, they are going to require frequent feedings for the best result that you can yield with this coral. Coming in at number 6 on our top 10 hard to keep corals is the Ruffled Ridge Coral. Now, the Ruffled Ridge Coral is a coral that prefers medium lighting, medium flow, and really can be placed anywhere in the tank. When you place it in your tank, you want to make sure you give it plenty of room so it can grow, because if it does, or I guess if you get lucky enough to have one of the ones that do well in captivity, it can grow relatively quickly. That aside, it's also a relatively fragile coral and can break really easily. So you want to make sure that you are considering what type of tank mates that you're putting in with this coral if you choose to keep it. Not to mention that it's related to the Pagoda Cup. See what I'm saying? Pagoda Cup's easy. Everybody says it's easy, and everybody says that this coral isn't really that easy to keep, or at least that certain specimens aren't doing well in captivity. Just saying. Coming in at number 5 on our top 10 hard to keep corals is the Acropora Coral. I went there. Yep, I did this. Now, I'm not telling people to not go out and buy Acropora. Acropora is bad, don't buy it. I'm not trying to say that. What I am trying to say is that this is a coral that requires really good husbandry. And if you don't have good husbandry, you are not going to do well with this coral. It requires pristine conditions. It needs the best of the best. Acroporas are some of the most beautiful corals that are available to hobbyists. But ultimately, if your aquarium isn't where it needs to be, if your parameters are not in check, if there's not stability within your system, wait until your tank and yourself are at a point where you are able to give the care that these corals require. Coming in at number 4 on our top 10 hard to keep corals is the sun coral. Now, the sun coral is completely non-photosynthetic, but I will say without a shadow of a doubt that this is probably one of the most stunning corals that is available to hobbyists. Now, the requirements for the sun coral are pretty interesting. It is a peaceful coral, so it's not going to be stinging neighbors, and that's something that you need to take in consideration for this coral in return, because you don't want to put it next to a coral that's going to sting it all up. This is a coral that legitimately, when you pick it up, you don't really want to touch the flesh. It requires low lighting and medium to strong flow. It wants to be usually in a cave or some type of overhang, so it really isn't just in full lighting. All that aside, this is a coral that you're going to have to figure out a feeding program for. Some hobbyists report this coral needs to feed up to once a day, which is pretty aggressive when you think about the needs or the requirements of a coral. And when it comes to that, if you have a coral that needs to be fed every day, you know, people go on vacation, and the likelihood of a fish tank sitter taking this coral out of the tank, putting it into a food bath, or taking the time to hand feed this coral is going to be slim to none. So that's something that you need to take into consideration if you're going to purchase a sun coral. Coming in at number 3 on our top 10 hard to keep corals is the chili coral. Now, this is a soft coral that is both non-photosynthetic, and it's going to require a good amount of flow, and it needs not so much lighting. So it's very similar to the sun coral in its requirements. Where it differs is in the fact that it has no skeleton at all, and its food requirements are a little bit different than the sun corals. It's looking for rotifers, it's looking for baby brine shrimp, and other type of microfauna that are suspended in the water column so it can actually filter them out and feed on them. All that aside, probably one of the most visually stunning soft corals out there, and it's relatively easy on the piggy bank. Coming in at number 2 in our top 10 hard to keep corals is the Carnation tree coral. Now, this is a coral that is very similar in its care requirements as to the chili coral, which we just talked about. And again, like many of the corals that we've had on this list, it's another non-photosynthetic coral. It's going to require
ample amount of foods or feedings to get its energy, which makes for a really hard to keep coral. Now, some hobbyists have reported hanging this coral upside down is one of the better ways to go about keeping this coral. And they also talk about using amino acids and getting those polyps to open up prior to adding any type of food to the aquarium. And there's just a couple of things that you can do to take on this coral. All that aside, it's probably one of the most visually stunning soft corals that I have ever seen, and I hope that someday I have the ability to keep one in my own personal reef tank. Coming in at number 1 on our top 10 hard to keep corals is the Pectinia Coral. There's a lot of conflicting information out there on this coral, and I think what it has to do with is the fact that there's so many mixed results for hobbyists. And I think what it comes down to for people that are keeping this coral and having success with it is whether or not they're actively feeding this coral. This is a coral that has been around for a long time in the hobby, but only, I would say, in the last 5 to 10 years, we have gotten some really interesting color variations of this coral. The most famous of them being the Space Invader, which you can see to the left. Now, I know that somebody's head is rolling off their shoulders and saying that I can't believe that this is the number 1 hard to keep coral on this top 10 list. And it's not so much about this coral itself. It has more to do with the miscommunication and information that is out there on the internet about this coral. Because in the last 12 years that I've been in this hobby, I have seen huge advancements, but it's not so much based on the fact that equipment has gotten that much better. It has everything to do with hobbyists sharing information. You're only as good as the information that you're working with. There's enough misinformation or conflicting information out there for me to try this coral. It's probably easy to keep, but I've also read that this is a coral that it's great to add next to other corals. But I've seen the sweeper tentacles on this coral, and I know that it's going to sting other corals. So why would that information be out there? And when I was doing the research for this video, I found that there was a lot of variance in information when it came to lighting, when it came to flow, tank placement, but there was one reoccurring theme throughout almost every single coral, and that was feeding the corals themselves. And all the information that I found on this specific coral was people that said that they fed it, said it was easy. People that said it was hard made no mention of feeding this coral whatsoever. You're only as accurate as the information that you're working with, and that's why I selected this coral to be the number 1 hard to keep coral.
Alright folks, that's going to do it for today's video. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And don't forget to mind the bell so you can be notified every time that we upload a new video. That's going to do it for this one. I want to thank you for joining me, and don't worry because there's plenty more Mad Hatter Reef videos to go around.